Hello, and welcome to Season 2 of Beyond Borders, a space for honest conversations where people, technology, art, and mental health meet. We're here to explore what's changing, what matters, and what it means to stay human in the middle of it all.
Hello, and welcome back to another Beyond Borders episode. And today we talk about how you would start, or how we would start again into the art space we are currently in. Again, we are here with Caroline Hammond and Spranko, who are the very good hosts, and we talk about the subject and their experience about starting with art and starting within the community of the X spaces and everything that surrounds it. In this episode, therefore, we will discuss where we would start the communities, how we would start on our feet, how we eventually start selling our art, and what does it take for an artist to actually be here within the space. And I wanted to start with immediately go to Franco from art alone and no extra engagement on projects. How many artists do you think actually make a living in a healthy manner in this space currently?
Oh, thank you for having me again, Pim. It's a good question. Um, I think the art community is a very large one, and different kinds of artists as well. But I think ultimately there's a handful of artists who are actually making good money from just their art alone. And ironically, a lot of them are not on social media. Some of them just have, you know, direct good network system, direct referrals and connections. So, but generally, I think a handful of artists, most artists have to supplement their work with, the revenue, with other streams of income, side jobs. So some artists even work 9 to 5, and then in the weekend they dedicate some time for their art. So, I think it would do a lot of artists better if there are ways and things that people can share to help them earn a living from their art.
So can we finally just remove the topic that when you start with art and making NFTs, that's an easy way to make money nowadays. I think that's a thing that still resides from the year 2021, where people really started coming into the space and looking for easy money. I think we can all agree that that part can be dismissed from the conversation, and it actually is quite hard work to get started and get momentum going. That's the main reason I want to ask the question, just to see, can we remove this topic from the beginning and see where we can go? And Caroline, you were speaking with many artists within your workspaces. And is that a regular theme that you talk about when it comes to how to make a living with art? Or is it more in the sense of this is the art we currently make and this is what we do?
That's an interesting question, Pim. And you're right, spanning 2 years now interviewing artists on X. And it's funny, initially, I was very much aware that it was kind of like a taboo subject. You didn't mention the finances, you didn't ask, were you making a living from art? But, and I think anyone who's been in a space with me knows that I push against that a little bit. And I actually ask the question now, they don't have to answer, of course, if they don't want to. Everybody does, in fairness, and is very open and sharing. But I think that the reality is that not many are making a living from art. And it isn't always a comfortable truth, But the truth is, very few are sustaining themselves purely through sales alone. And that's whether it's Web3 or whether it's social media or in the wider traditional sense. Most are weaving together streams, perhaps taking commissions, collaborations, sometimes jobs outside the space. But what's powerful though is that I think, if we park, like you said, this get rich quick thing, this theme that is around Web3 to one side, what Web3 does do for artists is give them visibility and tools that weren't accessible before. So while the percentage living fully off their art is small, the foundation, I think, being built is much bigger than the numbers we see today. Does that make sense?
Totally, and I really agree. And think when you look at it to the overall let's say, space of where we currently are in, and the artists, as you said, that are making a full-time job money worth is very small, and that people are making time to actually be active and stay active uh, to sell some art throughout the years. I think that's a thing that we might want to see increase in the upcoming time, that people are aware that it will take a lot of time, but they still do it because they like to be in communities, they like to be where they are, they make friends, they go to the events. And therefore, I was really thinking, what are, let's say, the beginning steps to go to that point? Would you join communities? Would you have a certain activity on your feed? Or if you would start over from zero, from scratch, what will be your first steps to do that, Caroline?
That's an interesting question, and it's one I ask myself often with the power of hindsight. It's wonderful, isn't it? I think what happens is, as artists or anyone creating a business, we get excited. We think we have to have a brand, we have to have a social media presence, we have to be here, there, and everywhere. And actually, we do that before we understand what it is that we're going to offer. And I think if I had my time over again, I'd approach things much more intentionally. So before jumping into accounts and, doing all of that, I'd sit with the question, what is my story as an artist and how do I want it to be received? Because actually, that framing makes everything else flow from there. So whether it's branding, platforms, or sales, it just helps it flow more authentically because you're not manufacturing after the event. You're kind of laying the foundations before you present yourself to the world. And I think I'd also map out the balance between creating, building visibility, and connecting so that I don't burn myself out.
That's a great bridge to ask the same question to Spranko. And also, if you can you add like what should new artists or new people within the space mentally prepare for before they join?
Uh, I would say majorly prepare for burnout. That's one mistake a lot of people make. And that's why I love what Caroline shared earlier. She mentioned speaking about just jumping into everything, thinking that you need to be everywhere all at once to have a sort of a presence. It's good if you can do it, but we need to remember that this task, this high hyperactivity, high engagement that you indulge in can really wear you down, where you find yourself lost. You started a brand and it's not going in any direction, not even in the direction you want it to. It's just one head there, one leg there, and scattered everywhere. One of the first things that I would do if I was to start it over would be to clearly map out what I want from this space. What exactly am I coming to do here? Am I setting up a personal brand? What is that personal brand about? Am I a streamer? Am I a spaces host? Am I a ghostwriter? Am I a founder? What am I doing here first? Secondly, I create my own dedicated schedule that I work with. A lot of times you come in here, especially as independent artists, there's this default drive that wants you to keep going. And you couple that with the societal pressure making you feel like you're not doing enough. So you show up in the morning and are you active right now? You have to show up and connect and yeah, you understand that. And at night, when you should be resting or however you decide, you find yourself just overworking yourself. So I would map out exactly what I want in this space and how I'm gonna achieve that. Like the times I want to stay and part just stay disciplined you know, and I would lastly prioritize my peace of mind. It's very easy to ignore that when you're chasing, 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 chasing. But right now, with the knowledge that I have and the experiences and the people I've connected with over the years, I would, like I'm currently doing, take some time out to refresh, reset. It's okay to miss out on stuff. Not every opportunity will be yours either way. right? Sometimes you're growing and you're getting this achievement and it feels great, but at the end of the day, you're just, back in bed and you feel like a vegetable. So it helps to really understand what you want, how you want to do that, and prioritize your self-care. I wouldn't change that.
That's great. And would you also prepare content? So let's say before you start the social media channels and making the content that people actually see besides your art, would you
Mm,
also suggest that people should map out a content plan before posting? This, for example, they made a new collection that they
mm.
planning to mint eventually or plan to bring out. And do they need to make a plan on how to showcase to the people? For example, with teasers, with a roadmap, all that kind of
Hmm.
stuff. And does that also help with prevent that they are chasing every day because they're just following their own plan and not chasing the plans of others?
Yes, I think that's really helpful. I recommend it as dedicated as you can be. Draft out a content calendar. It doesn't have to be daily activities, it could be just weekly, but it's sort of a guide and it can be as scanty or packed as you decide. But it really helps to give you like a rough guide into directing how you want to put your stuff out. And another thing that it helps with is giving you an edge over when, how, and what rather than just winging it and wake up on Monday, okay, Monday motivation, Tuesday, or okay, I just go with the flow. It gives you a guide, and you're able to study the output, see the result, and know what to change or what to improve on. So I would definitely recommend that. I like to stay organized, so it's a natural, but it's been really helpful for anybody that I've spoken to about it and they've utilized it. It just makes the workflow a little bit more streamlined. So, you have everything figured out.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I'm very wondering for you, Caroline, because you're running spaces, which is not a thing every artist do. What would your approach be? Would you also plan out just from the beginning, you're starting with, let's say, from scratch? Would you already start planning spaces, or would you do that on a later stadium? What would your, let's say, way of approach be and become?
Ah, Pim, interesting question. I think, it makes me think about what Sprenko just said about the importance of planning, knowing what it is that you want to do, what you want to share, what your story is, how you're going to do that. And I think that as I said earlier, in the rush to get started, we often forget that planning, and it is vital, really. So I think artists are slightly, or can be, slightly reticent about sharing themselves. I know that I was. I wanted to do spaces, I wanted to do a podcast. But, I also hide, and I think many artists do. We hide behind our art. We don't want to be seen. We're the kind of backstage people, not the upfront people, 9 times out of 10. So it's difficult. However, I think, and we've talked about this over the time now we've been doing these podcasts. Sometimes you have to take a deep breath and move yourself forward through that discomfort. So you have to think about all of those things. Look at what other people are doing and how they are growing as artists within a space. And then think about whether or not that will work for you. And it is a real decision because you can't do everything. When you're an artist working on your own, doing X spaces, doing art, doing podcasts, writing, whatever it is that you're doing, you only have finite time. And so it can be incredibly difficult when you're a creative to do all of those things well. And that is the key. So I think, you know, some reflection early on is a good thing to do, and then to plan, as Sprenko said, because otherwise we seriously do risk stress and burnout, and that's no good for creativity. Does that make sense, Pim?
Yeah, definitely. I was also thinking all that content that you make might actually be a burden for your overall creativity that you have in your art. So,
Absolutely.
so that's why I was thinking when you start, how could you preserve your creativity as much as possible. I'm thinking for solutions which come to AI to some degree because that can be helpful with content planning and making the content. But the problem of that is that you still want to come over as a genuine person and as a real person. You don't want to come over as an AI. Because showcasing your creativity, AI will put a lot of text into explaining how it works. But the moment you get asked for it when you join somebody else's page, podcast, or you go to an event, or you have the ability to explain your art piece at an exhibition, how do you do it back then? So I was also wondering, and a question for you both, and feel free who goes first. The moment you have some of your art available for everyone to see on the web or to buy, would you go to communities? Would you go to open calls? What are the first steps where you think, okay, that's going to be very beneficial, where I can also preserve my creativity and not burn out, and that it actually makes the content itself? What would you, again, unfortunately, chase for? What would be the main plan?
It's an interesting question. And what we're talking about here, then, I think, is visibility and community. And they do go hand in hand. And you covered many things with that question, Pim, and I'm going to go back a little bit. You talked about AI and this need for authenticity, and you're absolutely right. As an artist or anyone on social media, a writer, content creator, whatever it may be, it doesn't matter. We need to be authentic, whether we're using AI as a creative partner, as a tool, whatever it is. We have to learn that we cannot just hand over ourselves and our content creating or our art to an AI to produce cold. That is not going to work for anyone. It's not going to work for us as individuals, and it isn't going to work for us as a species, as humanity. That isn't what AI can do for us. But as a tool, as a creative partner, we can work with it so it knows us and reflects us back to ourselves more. And we know, I know when that happens, when that relationship, and I don't have a better word to describe it, but when that relationship with AI gets to that point where it is able to do that. And when you look at what it produces and you think, well, I could have written that. That is my writing. That is me, or you need to change little bits of it just to inject yourself. So there are ways that that can be done. And that's kind of, what we're talking about with the AI side of things. I think open calls can be powerful. You touched on that as well, because they don't just give visibility, they show where your work resonates and where it doesn't. And as an artist, that can give us valuable feedback. I think I'd also advocate being selective. Talking about community here. Again, it's tempting to be part of every community that invites you or that you come into contact with, but spreading yourself thin usually leads to burnout. So I think it's a balancing act. That's why I'm struggling here, because there are so many threads that we need to consider as artists on social media, in Web3 or wherever it may be, and we've got to find balance for them all. And I think from the point of view, what I want to share, which I think is quite important, is the real shift is understanding that any community that you're part of that contains artists isn't the same as your customer base. Other artists will support you, they'll share your work, they'll cheer you on, and that's priceless. But they're not necessarily the ones collecting your art. So you need both. You need a peer community that sustains you. You need wider visibility that connects you to collectors and audiences. And all of those threads, and then AI in the background, if that's supporting you as well, comes together to kind of polish your offering to the world. Have I gone off tangent there, or did that
No,
answer your
I
question?
think it's a great remark to actually say out loud that many of the communities are filled with artists and not necessarily collectors. I do think that are some communities that are filled with both. And we could address that in a different podcast, but the moment you're able to share your art with artists as well, it can be a friend become a friendly chat, which eventually might improve your art and keeps your creativity alive. Because artists are known to be creative, and I think creativity attracts. So I think that's definitely a good thing. But as you also said, for selling, artists are not really the people you search for. Of course, there are artists who do both, but for getting big collectors in all kinds of markets, those in general are not the artists themselves. I completely agree on that. What about you, Spanko? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a good starting point. I would say selective guardians. Like Carolyn said, is very tempting to want to be everywhere. You stretch yourself thin. Sometimes your work gets watered down a bit. Because you're trying to, be everywhere. You're trying to put stuff out. But I think essentially it's important to know, like I said, what you want to do, why you're here, and interact with communities for maybe different purposes. So you're part of a community strictly because the focus there is just putting you on, getting you access to galleries, getting you access to collectors. And another community can be there for the support. When you need that emotional and mental support, you have that community. It doesn't mean you wouldn't get visibility from there, but it's not just going to be as huge as the one that is solely focused on getting you to the bag. And one thing I would like to add is, as artists, as creators, we must remember to always prioritize the why over whatever you're trying to chase. The money, I don't want to sound, cliche. The money would come, right? If you're doing what you're meant to do, but we need to not get swept off or overridden by that constant drive to just get the next bag, get the next bag. And then we lose sight of who we are and what we're trying to do here as artists. At the end of the day, you're not just another paper chaser. Like, you have substance, you have value, you have impact to give the world with your gift, with your skill. So that's what I would add. That's the final thing I would add. Don't lose sight of who you are and why you're here when the money starts to come in.
I agree, always be yourself. And to give a realistic estimate what people can expect when they join this space, when it comes to followers or when it comes to selling art, are
Mm.
there realistic messages to give for, let's say, after a year, after 6 months? I would say that it's better to see where you are after a year than after 6 months, but it's more for personal experience.
Hmm.
What are your thoughts on that, Spanko?
Yeah, I would be 100% honest. It's very hard, especially now where you have to appeal to the algorithm on different platforms, right? So I'm not gonna sugarcoat it and say, yeah, but it varies for different people. You could start off your social media account, for example, X, and in 3 months you have 5,000 followers. And you can start off in 2 years, you're still under 1,500. So it just depends on who people can perceive when they connect with your account. What are your replies like? Are they just, I'm a reply guy, or are you having meaningful interactions in the comment section with people? What is your engagement strategy like? What kind of accounts are you following? What kind of accounts are you interacting with? What spaces are you, walking into when you're networking with other artists? So it's really difficult. And even when it starts to get better, I wouldn't say it's entirely easy. It's just the growth can be super fast and it can take a long time. So that's one of the first things I'm going to share. What I would recommend to navigate that is, don't be overswept by metrics. Look at them, study your analytics, see what you're doing that is bringing that little additional traction, capitalize on it, try to amplify that, and just relate with people authentically. The right people who are meant for you will naturally come to you.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great advice. Also, a great example that sometimes some accounts can have a major following after a year, and some
Hmm.
after 2 years, they have a lot lower amount of following. and they feel
Mm-hmm.
like lacking, but it doesn't have to be. I have also seen small accounts that have been collected on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't really matter how much you have, how much followers or collectors. It's more, are you putting in genuine reactions, yes or no, and
Mm-hmm.
creating genuine contacts? And I think Caroline has also been doing that in a great way via this space. So I'd love to hear more about her thoughts on the last question.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think the measures of success in this space, we need to think about them in broader terms. Like Sprenko said, more than just sales or income. If you track money, you'll often feel like you're failing because growth here is rarely linear. For me, I think the more realistic measures are things like, are more people engaging with your work than they were 6 months ago? Are you building relationships that lead potentially to opportunities? Are you clearer today about your artistic voice than you were when you began? Because all of those things sort of emerge over time and become more solid for you as an artist, I think. Financial milestones matter, and we have to acknowledge that. Of course they do. But in Web3, especially, I think success often starts with visibility, trust, and connection. Those are much harder to put numbers on, but they're what lead to the tangible wins down the line. So, yes, there are realistic measures, but they look more like markers on a journey than a final destination. Hope that makes sense.
Again, I completely agree. I think therefore what to see and when you what we can say towards new artists with our last message and maybe convince them to start and make a plan. Before starting, be realistic about your expectations, make a plan, see what works for you, and don't try to chase every trend. Try to be yourself and see where eventually what you like to do so you keep your creativity. Try to balance it where you stay creative and also be active on making the content and showing people what you make and see what communities work for you, what works for you in general. That can be a podcast, it can be X spaces if you have the time, and if you still need to work for 9 to 5, that's completely normal and also acceptable. So don't worry a single second about it and have some fun, try to stay creative again and see where it comes from. What are your last message to new creators out there, Caroline?
I think my last message would be to say that when you begin the journey of trying to make a living from art, expect a marathon, not a sprint. You know, it takes resilience, it takes patience, it takes openness and the ability to adapt. So I think, from my point of view, the best approach is to balance three threads. Keep honing the craft, as you just said, Pim. Keep telling your story and keep building those key relationships. The money, the reward follows the meaning and the consistency, not the other way around. That's my final message.
Great final message. And do you also have a final message, Spanko?
Yes, I would just like to add the beautiful share Caroline has just shared with us that there will be highs and lows, and on the days where nobody's collecting your art, your page is not getting visibility, it doesn't mean you're a failure. It doesn't mean your work is not good enough. It just means that there's days where the sun wouldn't shine just because it has to rain. So embrace your art, love it passionately, and share and tell those stories through your art because it's a gift that was given to you. And whatever comes along the way is because you deserve it and value it. So just take it one step at a time and keep creating.
Great
Love
final
that,
message.
Spenko.
And now the episode comes to an end. Thank you very much for listening again. Feel free to follow us on all our socials. We are on Spotify, LinkedIn. We have plenty of X accounts and we are on Instagram. And if you are starting and you want to have more answers, feel free to reach out to one of us or to the Beyond Borders social media and we will help you in either way. Thank you very much and see you on the next episode.